We just recorded this whole video and then realized we weren't actually recording.
I'm happy about this because that means that every time that I forget to record, I've got a hall pass now.
What we were saying is, we have heard from a lot of people that they want to get into bikepacking, but they are intimidated to start, and one of the things that they're worried about is how to even start planning a trip.
We're in the process of planning for our next trip right now, so we thought this would be a good chance to talk about how we tackle something like that.
We've been taking bike trips for about 5 years now, and while that is not that long in the grand scheme of things, we have learned some lessons that we thought maybe would be helpful for other people who are trying to plan their own trip. So we are going to cover, what are we covering? We are covering how to pick a destination, planning your route, navigating while you're on the trip, and then everyone's biggest stressor, which is where are you going to sleep that night?
We've been doing this long enough to know what works for us, but there's always something new to learn, and we'd love to hear what maps or apps or services have worked well for you.
So what do we talk about first? Probably picking a destination.
The first part of the process is just figuring out where you want to go. And we have a few simple criteria that we've used longer than we've been bikepacking. For most of our travel, we try to find something that has mountains, old things, and a place to, or a way to treat yourself occasionally along the way. Another thing that we found is really helpful in determining where we want to go, looking at the population density of a place. Densely populated areas, you spend a lot more time struggling with traffic, just navigating other people, and it's much harder to find places to wild camp, which is one of the things that we really enjoy doing while traveling by bike.
The point we're trying to make is that you got to figure out what kind of trip you want. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the kinds of trips that you see other people doing. There are a lot of people that might try and see how many miles they can do in a day. And I know that if I tried to do 100 miles a day for 10 days, well, first off, I couldn't do that. And I would also just burn out by day 4 and I would want to quit bikepacking forever. So we tend not to plan trips like that. It might work for Chris because he likes pushing himself more than I do. I like pushing myself too, but maybe not as much as Chris does.
I think I just have a shorter memory. I would also hate it by day 4, and by the end, when I fail, I would say never again until 2 months later.
Yeah.
I'd be like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, and then the other things to think about is just the practical factors. So the season that you are going in and the normal weather for that season doesn't necessarily mean you will get the normal weather for that season, but it's just something to think about.
And you also have to figure in how much time you have available and how far you can go in a day.
And we'll talk a little bit more about figuring out your daily mileage in a second.
Another consideration while planning your route is where you're going to get food and water. Some places it's not a problem. You could eat at a restaurant every meal of the day and never worry about it. And other places you might not see even a convenience store for several days at a time. Also the quality of roads that you're going to be on.
Yeah.
And then finally budget. The type of trip you take will definitely look different depending on whether you're going to be paying to stay in a hotel every night or trying to find warm showers or wild camp.
Yeah. Or if you're flying is just always going to be a lot more expensive.
When planning for a trip, it's best to underestimate how many miles you'll do in the day.
Yeah, we just start lower than we think we're gonna need, and then we adjust up as we figure out our pace. It's just nice to build in more time into your route than you think you need so that you can maybe go explore 1/10 of the things that you want to go explore.
Seriously. You can always find something else to do while traveling.
The next thing we're going to talk about is actually planning the route. Let's say that you've picked a destination, you know how much time you have off, you have a general idea of your daily mileage. How do you actually make a route that you can at least start with? You can either use an established route or you can make up your route yourself. Most of our trips in the US have been from bikepacking.com. Other places to look for routes are adventurecycling.com, bikepackingroutes.org, Eurovelo routes if you're in Europe, and then there are some great routes posted to the bikepacking and bike touring subreddits, and there are some Facebook pages you should check out too. One important caveat.
We find that we have to spend more time on the bikepacking routes than what bikepacking.com recommends. So the other way is building your own route.
When planning our own routes, we find that one of the most useful places to start is just Google. When you think back to the things that you are looking for, so for example, we were looking for mountains, old things, and places to relax, then we might search Google for famous foods of Sardinia and like where you can get those foods. And then we would find restaurants and places that we could have those experiences. And we'd just throw pins on a Google map of like where some of those places were, or most interesting ancient sites in Sardinia. And then we just like found those and put those on the map. And right now you're not trying to figure out like, are those places close to each other? You're just like throwing them on a map. Once you have a bunch of pins on the map of all the things you're curious about, you can take a step back and say, okay, is there a way to connect as many of these dots as possible? Often we just start out connecting things in Google Maps. Although the cycling directions sometimes don't work great, and especially in other countries, sometimes they just don't work at all. But even the car directions get us a general idea of how long a route will be and if it's even remotely close to fitting in our time frame. Part of this process is just knowing that you truly can't see everything. It's sad but true. Time to practice non-attachment. Then I usually make a draft of an actual cycle route in a cycle-specific navigation app. I like to use Komoot for this. There's a paid and a free version, and the free version does everything I need it to do, and I didn't really find the paid version to be worth it. One thing though, to be able to access the maps online, you do need to purchase them, but that's just a one-time investment and you get your first region free. I just put in a few of my must-see places and see what Komoot does to connect them. I like it because I can pick different types of cycling and it'll change the route slightly. A couple words of warning though, if you pick gravel cycling, it'll sometimes do weird things to get you about 5 more feet of gravel, like taking you the long way through a farmer's field. I do just like the cycling option since it tends to pick less traveled roads and bike paths, though it means that you end up on pavement more often. Also, the map information is not always accurate, like the time it tried to send me down this closed road in Japan, which I only found out later when I was messing around in Street View and Google Maps. This is another reason to build an extra time into your trip. Also, Komoot really likes stairs. That's annoying.
That's what Komoot told us to come down. Thanks, Komoot.
There's always stairs with Komoot.
Once we have a route on a map, often I get a little bit more into the weeds about how much up or down that does, or if it looks like there should be a connection between 2 points on that route, but the maps aren't providing that level of information. I'll do a deep dive into Google Satellite View, or sometimes use Strava heat maps to see if there's connections there.
Strava heat maps is good for if you're trying to go from one destination to another and you have multiple ways to get there, but you have like no other information about which way would be the best. Sometimes if you turn on Strava heat maps, you can see like which way the cyclists take the most, which can just give you another data point.
And in more remote areas, I find that a good topographic map like Gaia or CalTopo can actually provide quite a bit more information. CalTopo in the Northwest or the Western US is really useful because you can have a fire history layer.
Yeah. Some other options for this part of the planning process are Ride with GPS, which we haven't used much because the free version isn't great for planning and the paid version is kind of expensive, or Cycle.travel, which is great and free, but the last time I tried to use it, I wasn't able to save long routes. We took a look at it again recently, and it actually looks like they've fixed a bunch of things and added some features, which seems pretty cool, but I can't get it to work for our upcoming trip to Japan. So I might consider using this for future planning, but there's still some kinks to work out. Another app we've used for general navigation is Osmand Maps, but mostly now we use it for one cool feature that it has. You can download a layer of Wikipedia articles that are like geolocated on the map, and a lot of times they're just like, this town exists and there are 400 people there. But other times it's like, this is an ancient cave where Zeus was born or something like that. So you can sort of add that in there to sort of help refine that route. The nice thing is this all sounds really complicated, but you can also just like go to a destination, land, stay in a hotel or not, and just like figure it out from there. Like that's also totally an option. It's just if you want to get like super nerdy and plan it all out ahead of time, and if that's something that brings you joy, then these are tools that you can use to do that. And you can also sort of do a combination of the two where you just plan like the first couple of days and then you sort of figure it out from there, because often you don't know what you're going to like about a country or what you're going to be interested in until you actually get there.
And even when we do have a fairly firm line on the map, we often make little changes along the way.
If you are going on a trip that requires flying or using a train or a bus or some other form of transportation, then that just like complicates things a little bit. So you will want to think about how you are getting to and from your trip. Also, if you're going to use bike boxes. So like, does your bike need to be broken down and in a box in order for you to get to the beginning and the end of your trip? So like getting to the airport kind of depends on your local situation. For us, we live like 2.5 hours away from the airport that we tend to use, and so we have to figure out how we're going to get there, which sometimes we've driven ourselves, sometimes we've taken the shuttle. Anytime you use like a taxi service or a shuttle, it ends up being a little bit more complicated because they don't understand. It's hard for people to understand how much space a bike box needs.
Sometimes they underestimate and they think, oh, it'll fit. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
We don't need to bring the trailer with the shuttle bus. Yeah. And sometimes they say, no way, it's impossible. And then we fit 2 bike boxes in without any trouble.
It's always a little bit of a like, we know it can work. And then like once you get off the plane or off the train, are you going to put your bike together at the airport, or are you going to get a taxi to your hotel and then do it there? Like these are just things that you need to think through. And we've done it both ways. Honestly, I think our favorite way might be putting the bike together in the airport at this point.
I think it's an ideal situation when you can put the bike together in the airport. There have been several reasons why we couldn't.
Yeah.
One being like in Italy, we traveled by train from the airport and the bikes had to be in boxes on that train.
Yeah.
We've almost always used cardboard boxes, which can be disposable. We've also found that we've been able to break down the cardboard boxes and ask a hotel if they'd be willing to hold it for a week or 2 for us. Usually officially there's a fee for holding a bike box for you, but there's a good chance that the person working on any given day won't actually charge you for it.
It is something to consider though, because a lot of the hotels, might not have as much storage space, so it's just like you're asking them to do you a favor even if you are paying them for the service.
Absolutely. And when we've done that, we've always determined that it would be worth it for us to pay that price.
Yeah. That's usually when we have a shorter turnaround time. If we have more time at the end of the trip, we will often just build in a couple of days to be able to go find a bike box at a local bike shop. That's something that we never leave less than 2 days for, because often we will get to our final destination, we'll go around and ask at all the bike shops, and they'll be like, oh, we don't have it right now, but we will in 2 days when we get our next bike shipment. And then, worst case scenario, you can always just like scrounge recycling dumpsters for cardboard. And make your own box. But it's just nice to have a couple of days to figure that out and not stress about it. And then also don't forget, if you're flying with a bike, to call your airline ahead of time and make sure that they have room on the plane for your bike. It's never been a problem for us, but it's something you should do. Whether you arrive with a planned out route or you're just winging it, you're going to need to make little adjustments along the way, and having tools that are flexible can really make a difference. But first, a note about using dedicated GPS units or phones for navigation.
We do all of our navigating with our phones. We know that a lot of people love their Garmin's or other GPS devices, and we just have never found a need to bring another device, another battery into our setup where we already have too many cameras and things. Yeah. Even on very short trips, we will always have an external battery pack with us, at least one, and we prioritize making sure that our phones are well enough charged to navigate, even if that means that we don't get the shots that we want.
Yeah, we always put our phone on low battery mode, or we try to remember to put our phone on low battery mode. And we do things like turning the screen off while the navigation apps are running instead of just having them run the whole time.
Generally, I can get a solid 2 days out of my phone battery. Keep airplane mode.
Airplane mode and low battery mode together,
Yeah, and then that's still using my phone sometimes as a camera and reading Wikipedia. It's not like I'm only using it as a map app.
If you've used both the GPS device and a phone for navigation and you prefer one or the other, we'd love to know why. So please let us know in the comments. We find ourselves lately drawn to 3 apps for navigating and adjustments along the route: Komoot, Osmand Maps, and MapOut. In more populated areas and on pavement, I usually navigate with Komoot, and Chris usually uses Osmand Maps. Both of these apps have voice navigation, which helps save our phone's battery life, like we said. We just turn the volume up and the screen off, and it tells us when to turn or when we're off route. When we're in more remote places, we tend to use MapOut. It's really easy to understand mileage and elevation on that app, and you can edit the route while offline, which is something you can't do in Komoot. You can do that in Osmand Maps too, but it's just easier in MapOut. Chris also uses it to refine the route while on the road because it's really easy to compare elevation gain between 2 different routes. A lot of the map apps that we're talking about, you have to download the map of that area before you leave cell phone service or before you get disconnected from Wi-Fi or whatever.
Internationally, we've opted to have like limited cellular data. So we don't have internet access in a lot of places that a lot of people would, but then a lot of our trips are into extremely remote areas also that just simply don't have any service. It's not all staring at a computer. We find some of the best information comes from just interacting with people along the way, or even asking friends who have been there before.
Yeah, I would say some of the best and the worst information comes from the people that we meet along the road.
That's fair.
We could probably tell 2 stories to illustrate this. One of them is when we were in Turkey and we ended up at this very remote archaeological site, and it was very hot, and so we stopped and took a nap in the middle of the day, and while we were there, the guy whose family owned the land that the archaeological site was on showed up, and he was like, oh, there's a brand new road that's not on any of the maps that's like perfectly paved, and it will avoid all of this up and down that you have, and it will also go by a few more archaeological sites if you're interested in that. And we took his advice, and it was like the best ever.
Epic downhill for a while on like a single lane paved road and saw some really cool ruins.
We like saw this old Roman ruin that was also someone's house, and the family invited us in. The little grandchild was like walking us through the ruins, and we saw another castle, and that was really cool. So that was one instance where asking somebody really paid off. And then I think the other story is sort of a combination of a bunch of stories from when we were in Turkey, when we would ask people or we wouldn't even ask people if the road went through, but they would just be like, no, the road is broken. The road doesn't go through. And
take the highway in the bottom of the valley.
There was one time where we got, and there was like an actual river blocking our path and like no way to cross the river. But every other time it was like the road was just a gravel road. So like what they considered broken was different than what we considered unusable.
Also respect people. If they say that it's closed, then you should probably.
Yeah. And often, like, if they say that it's closed and that's the end of the conversation, then, like, you should respect that. Often people will say, like, oh, yeah, that road's closed, but you could make it through on a bike. So, like, clarifying, is it closed to cars or is it closed to everyone? Oh, I guess the other thing we should talk about is, like, what happens if the road actually doesn't go through?
We won't commit to some place that we don't have the time and resources to backtrack. If we think that is going to be the better route to go the questionable way, and we have the time and food and water and whatnot, but it goes through, then it's amazing.
Yeah, that's like our favorite times. When we do get to that point where we're like, oh, this road is becoming more and more questionable, we don't know if it's going to go through. We know that there's a possibility that we might not be able to keep going. And so if that happens, the only person to blame is ourselves. We tried, and the worst case scenario is we saw something new. It's all about sort of expectations and attitude. Finally, the thing that is the biggest stressor on a bikepacking trip: where are you going to sleep?
There are generally 4 options. You can either pay to stay in a hotel, rely on the kindness of strangers, whether that's Couchsurfing, Warmshowers, or just asking to camp in a yard. You can pay to stay in a campground, or you can find a remote place to try to wild camp.
So we're going to go through each one of those options and talk a little bit more about each one. So let's talk about hotels. Most people have stayed in a hotel, so you know the drill. A lot of times when you're booking a normal vacation, a lot of times you tend to book your hotels ahead of time, and that can work well on a bikepacking trip too, especially if you're going to be in a place that's more crowded or popular. In those cases, you might want to try and book ahead, but we tend to try to stay flexible and potentially book like the day of or the day before. Sometimes that might get more expensive, but sometimes honestly it's cheaper because they have hotel rooms that they want to fill. It is an expensive option, but sometimes if you're in a city, it might be the only option that you have.
You want to make sure that either they're okay with you taking your bike into your room, or hotels that are not okay with that, or the rooms are too small, will have a utility room or someplace secure that they would let you lock your bike up. Mm-hmm. So if hotels aren't an option for whatever reason, relying on the kindness of strangers is great. Couchsurfing and Warmshowers probably require a little bit more advanced planning, because you should really reach out at least a few days in advance, because people don't necessarily check every day. But I think that when it works out, it's probably more rewarding. You get that personal interaction with a real human.
Also, in case people don't know what Warmshowers is, it's a platform online where you can pay to be a member, and then people offer up their houses to people who are traveling by bike, and they allow you to stay in their house for free. Sometimes that's what it is. It's a bed, or maybe even just like a spot in their yard. And sometimes there's like dinner involved and like cultural exchange or something like that. So we haven't actually we've hosted Warmshowers, but we've never actually used it on the road. The places that we were in didn't have a lot of options for Warmshowers, but it seems like a lot of people have had really good experiences, and we'd love to use it more one day. And then Couchsurfing is sort of the same thing, but it's just for any traveler. And I think that these platforms maybe were more popular in the past, and there might be other options now. If you know of other options, let us know in the comments. Getting outside of bigger cities and towns, you start to see more paid campgrounds. These can be cheaper than hotels, but they aren't always, and they vary in terms of amenities. Some have showers and picnic tables and even restaurants, but some are just empty fields with nothing else. It depends on what country you're in, but different countries have very different ideas of what a paid campground should be. No matter where you're at, more and more, the campgrounds are catering to
RVs.
Hard-sided vehicles like vans and RVs and things like that. And in Europe especially, it's like almost exclusively like RVs, vans, or like these like semi-permanent structures that people set up in a campground and then just like leave there forever. And so it can feel a little bit weird when you come in on your bike and there's like, oh yeah, there's that spot over there that you can put your tent, and it's like a field next, like literally underneath a bridge, or like in the middle of the gathering space. In the US, there's also still a wide variety of paid campgrounds, and some don't allow tents, so you have to double check that it's not an RV-only site. But the ones that allow tents usually have a picnic table at each site, and often a little bit of privacy in the form of just space or trees or shrubs between each site. I guess what we're trying to say is paid campgrounds are a hit or miss, and often a miss for us.
Yeah, that being said, campgrounds can be a good place to congregate if that's what you are looking for. We've met some great people in campgrounds. As you're becoming more remote, if the other options are no longer available, sometimes you end up having to ask someone if you can camp in their yard, or we understand that often fire departments or schools or churches can be a great place to try to camp. We try to plan to not be in that situation. But it seems like for other people out there, it's worked well. And I'm sure at some point during our cycling journeys, we will end up doing this, and it'll probably be good.
It's like an advanced move.
Although there may be people who feel like our preference, which is wild camping, would be the more advanced move.
That's true.
We want to at least spend some nights wild camping.
Yeah. And that just means like camping outside in an undeveloped place, and not in a campground where there are showers and, you know, electricity and other people and sounds, but just like out in nature somewhere.
I think a lot of people are intimidated because it's not something you can you can't book in advance.
Yeah.
And so there's
and you
up
don't,
until you are at that site, it's an unknown.
Yeah.
But there are some things that you can do to kind of anticipate where you might end up. iOverlander or other apps can show dispersed sites, so it's a place that has impacted and other people have camped there in the past, so you can get a sense of what you're going to find there. We also often just look at a map, and the green spaces
tend to be forested.
tend to be forests, and so if you kind of plan on getting out of the cities and fields and to the green spaces, which are forests, there's more likely to be a place that you would be able to set up a tent, and that is as long as it's not too steep.
Yeah.
Which means that you need to be able to read a topographic map
at least
as well.
At least to like a basic level where you can see like, okay, the lines on a topographic map are, when they're closer together, it's steeper terrain, and when they're farther apart, it is less steep terrain. And if you can find a spot where they're farther apart, then you're more likely to be able to find a flat space to camp there.
So yeah, things that we'll look for like on topographic maps in steep areas are if there's a like one wide spot on a steep ridge or something, that might mean that that's actually a big plateau. Or like a shelf, not just a gentle slope down. Or near bodies of water, even in steep terrain, there might be a flatter section. or saddles or the tops of things, although those are usually windy.
Yeah, camping next to a body of water, if it's flat, that can be a great place to set up a tent, but you might end up wet because all of the wet air, cold air settles in that spot overnight. Camping on the top of a ridge in a saddle also is nice,
Like,
except
guaranteed
that's
to
where
be
the
windy.
wind goes over the, so yeah, that's just something to keep in mind too. And this is all just stuff that like eventually you figure it out because you have a bad night of sleep. Before you even consider wild camping in a place, it's good to know the rules of where you're at. And so those rules differ by country to country, province within a country or state, and then also like within different countries, they have different types of protected land that have different rules. Some countries are way more lenient. Some countries will say that it's illegal, but nobody actually cares. Turkey being one of those. And some countries will say that it's illegal, and if you break those rules, it's very dangerous. So, for example, in the United States, there are a bunch of different kinds of public land, and then there's also private land. Generally, in the US, we tend not to camp on private land because if you know anything about the US, you know that people really like their guns. And in some parts of the United States, people don't take kindly to strangers camping on private land that they own. So we tend to try to avoid that when possible and prioritize camping on public land. But there are a few different kinds of public land in the US, and we wanted to give you a little primer so that if you ever did decide that you wanted to wild camp here in the United States, you would know the legality of doing that based on the different kind of land that you're on. So we have national park land, U.S. Forest Service land, Bureau of Land Management, and then state and county public lands.
National parks are publicly owned, but the opportunities to wild camp are very, very slim. There are more rules.
And you usually have to book ahead of time.
And stay in campsites.
Yeah. Not only within a designated campground, but they assign you a site often.
Like a tent pad.
Yeah. And so there's just a lot more rules, there's a lot less flexibility, and it makes it harder to plan ahead when you are traveling through those areas. We tend to avoid national parks for that reason.
And then national forests, there are some rules, but not nearly as many as national parks.
Within a national forest, they might have established paid campgrounds. And if you're camping in there, then, often they'll have amenities and you have to pay for that campground. Outside of those campgrounds, as long as you are a half mile away, usually, then you can camp wherever you want to.
But you should.
But you should find an established campsite outside. They're usually called dispersed sites. They usually aren't labeled on the map. You usually will just find them as you're moving through an area. So it's like not necessarily just like wild, pristine land that you're setting up your tent on and like crushing all the flowers and everything. It's like a site that someone else has used and you can set up your tent there and it's free and it's often quiet and beautiful and there's usually water nearby and it's just like lovely.
And then there's Bureau of Land Management or BLM land that generally has fewer rules. There are still some designated campgrounds, or in Utah, there's a lot of BLM land that is adjacent to national parks. And so there's more restrictions close to the parks. But in general,
you can camp anywhere on BLM land.
And in general, BLM land is used much more for like pasture land and
cattle grazing.
And it is overall much more impacted to begin with. So you can, as long as you're practicing good backcountry ethics, then you can kind of camp anywhere.
And often on BLM land, because it's cattle grazing land, there will be fences and it will look like private property. But the general rule of thumb is as long as you close any fence that you come to, then you can camp behind that fence. You should always consult an accurate map for where you're at and make sure that you are on the kind of land that you think you're on. And that's where things like CalTopo and Gaia come into play. And then there's also, each state has state parks usually, and so often there are paid campgrounds in state parks. Usually state parks don't allow dispersed camping, so camping outside of those paid campgrounds, but it varies state by state. And then there's often also like county parks that might allow you to camp there too. And again, kind of like state parks, usually you have to camp in the paid campgrounds. I will say that the paid campgrounds in the United States tend to be
more spacious.
You have more room. They tend to be quieter. They tend to be like prioritize things like shade and privacy compared to a lot of the campgrounds in Europe.
At least the like state and county park campgrounds.
Yeah.
If you're looking for the RV highway side experience,
Yeah.
you can find that.
Yeah.
KOAs are everywhere.
Yeah, but in general,
But you can also find paid campgrounds that still feel quiet and like you're in a natural setting.
Yeah. Hopefully that was a good and a clear enough primer on the different kinds of public land in the United States and how you can factor them into your planning. The last thing that we wanted to talk about is managing expectations. Just because you've spent all this time planning your route and you're going to go on your first bikepacking trip and you're really excited about it, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that every single day on your trip is going to be like the highlight day of your entire life. And a lot of bikepacking is suffering. So I just want people to expect that, because I find for myself, if I go into a situation with really high expectations, a lot of the times I can be very sad.
That it can ruin it for you when it's actually a perfectly pleasant experience.
Yeah, it's great. It's just like wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be. So that is just like something that I have been practicing. And a lot of times like our favorite experiences have been times when we go in thinking this is going to be terrible.
And then it is.
And then it is.
And we love it.
Yeah. But we have the food we need, we have the time we need, and we have the water we need, and we have our tent and we can camp wherever, and it's fine.
So we've been rambling on about all this long enough, but I'm sure that plenty of you have more advice. Let us know how you navigate or how you find your campsites or any other tips or advice you have.
Yeah, if you have an app that we didn't mention here that is great for navigation, we'd love to know. Oh, we didn't mention Windy.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than climbing uphill into a headwind, and Windy will let you know in advance that you're going to have a miserable day.
We have occasionally thought about planning an entire trip where we just wake up every day and go in the direction the wind is blowing. It's not always possible because sometimes you end up just like in an ocean.
Back and forth,
Yeah.
back and forth.
Cool. Hopefully this was helpful. We always want to thank our Patreon supporters because they motivate us to keep doing this every month. And other than that, we will see you next time.
When we're out on an adventure.
Bye.